You didn't imagine it. One day they felt easy to talk to. Natural, relaxed, like the interaction just flowed without effort. And then suddenly something shifts. Not dramatically, not in a way you can clearly point to, but enough that every conversation now feels slightly tense. Same person, same dynamic, but something is off, and you can't explain why. Their replies feel a little colder than before. Their tone carries an edge you don't remember being there. Even neutral things you say somehow land wrong. Conversations that used to feel effortless now feel like something you have to carefully manage. And the uncomfortable part? Sometimes, you can feel that you were part of what triggered it without realizing. A comment, a joke, a moment that seemed harmless at the time. And which makes it worse, because now you're not just confused about them, you're questioning yourself too. Did I say something wrong? Did I push too far without noticing? Or are they just showing who they've always been, and I missed it? So your brain starts trying to solve it. It replays conversations. It scans for patterns. It tries to connect dots that don't quite line up. You start analyzing tone, timing, word choice, things you never had to think about before. And without realizing it, your behavior begins to shift too. You become a little more careful, a little more aware, maybe even a little more guarded. Because something in the dynamic no longer feels stable, even if nothing obvious has happened. But here's what makes this confusing. The shift feels sudden, but the cause isn't obvious. Yet there's no clear moment where everything changed. No single event you can point to and say, that's when it happened. Just a quiet, unsettling feeling that something is different now. And if you don't catch what's actually happening here, you'll keep misreading people in the exact same way. The shift never announces itself. It doesn't start with a fight or a clear moment you can point to. It shows up quietly, in ways that are easy to dismiss if you're not actively looking for them. But here's the difference most people miss. This isn't random. It follows a pattern. And once you see that pattern, you can actually catch it in real time. There are 3 clear signs this shift is happening. First, delayed reactions. They still respond, but something feels slightly off. They laugh, but there's a pause, like they had to decide to laugh. They agree, but it feels processed, not natural. That tiny delay is your first signal that something internally has changed. Second, shortened responses. They're not openly rude. They're not starting conflict. But their replies lose warmth, messages get shorter, conversations end quicker. Where there used to be engagement, there's now just enough response to keep things going, but not enough to feel the same. Third, unexpected defensiveness. This is where it becomes harder to ignore. You say something normal, something that used to be completely fine, and their reaction feels slightly guarded. Not aggressive, not explosive, just defensive in a way that doesn't match the situation. Like they heard something you didn't actually say. And here's where the pattern becomes dangerous. None of these moments feel big enough to confront. So you don't bring them up. Instead, you adjust. You become more careful with your words. You start thinking before you speak in ways you never had to before. You try to keep things smooth, to avoid whatever tension you're starting to feel. But while you're focused on managing the moment, something else is happening underneath. Each delayed reaction, each shorter reply, each defensive response isn't isolated. It's stacking. And if you don't recognize this stage for what it is, you don't just miss the signals. You lose awareness of the pattern while it's still small enough to understand. Because by the time it feels obvious, you're no longer reacting to a moment. You're reacting to a pattern that's already been forming, without you realizing it. What you're seeing feels random, unpredictable, like something just shifted for no clear reason. But it's not random at all. It's one of the most consistent patterns in human behavior. And it starts with something your brain is doing automatically, without you ever noticing. Here's the truth. Your brain doesn't store events, it stores meanings. Every interaction you have splits in 2. What actually happened, and what your mind decides it means. And once a meaning is assigned, your brain doesn't stay neutral. It starts filtering everything to match that meaning. Let's say one moment feels slightly off. Maybe your tone didn't land right. Maybe they felt ignored for a second. The moment gets labeled. Quietly. Automatically. They don't respect me. They're being dismissive. They've changed. And here's where the real shift happens. Once their brain labels you a certain way, it stops trying to understand you and starts trying to prove itself right. This is what psychologists call confirmation bias, but you don't need the term to see the effect. From that point on, neutral moments don't feel neutral anymore. A short reply isn't just busy, it feels intentional. A delayed response isn't random, it feels like avoidance. Their brain starts collecting evidence. Not objectively, more selectively. And the more it finds, the stronger the pattern becomes. This is pattern reinforcement. Each interaction doesn't stand alone anymore. It feeds the same conclusion over and over again. So even if you show up the same way you always have, they're no longer experiencing you in real time. They're experiencing a version of you that their mind has already decided on, and that's why the shift feels so confusing from your side. Because you're reacting to what's actually happening, while they're reacting to what they believe is happening. Two completely different realities, built from the same moments, and once this loop locks in, it becomes incredibly hard to break. Because you're not just dealing with behavior anymore. You're dealing with a mental filter that's rewriting everything you do in real time. Here's the part almost no one realizes, and it's where everything quietly starts to spiral. You're not just experiencing the shift, you're reacting to it. And those reactions, the subtle ones you don't even notice, are often what make it worse. At first, it feels harmless. You sense something is off, so you adjust. You become a little more careful with your words. You think twice before making a joke you would have said easily before. You replay messages in your head before sending them. It feels like you're being thoughtful, like you're keeping things smooth. But here's what's actually happening underneath. The more you try to fix the tension, the more unnatural you become, and that reinforces their belief that something is off. Your pauses feel different. Your tone becomes slightly controlled. Your responses lose the spontaneity they were used to. And even if they can't explain it, they can feel it. So now, from their perspective, something really has changed, which strengthens the exact story their mind was already building. This is where the loop tightens. You feel the shift. You adjust your behavior. They feel your adjustment. It confirms their suspicion. Their behavior shifts more, you adjust even further, and without realizing it, you're both feeding the same pattern from opposite sides. It escalates like this. You try to sound right instead of natural. You try to avoid tension instead of addressing it. You start managing their reactions instead of just being yourself. And slowly, you stop showing up as the version of you they were originally comfortable with. That's the trap. Because now, and even if the original issue was small, or even imagined, your reactions have made the dynamic feel genuinely different. By the time it becomes obvious, it doesn't feel like a misunderstanding anymore. It feels like something real has changed. But the uncomfortable truth is, part of that change came from how you responded to something you didn't fully understand. And that's what makes this stage so dangerous. Because the more you try to fix it blindly, the more you end up proving the very thing you're trying to avoid. Most people only understand this pattern after it's already damaged the dynamic. By then, they're reacting emotionally, not observing clearly. But if you want real control in these situations, you don't need more awareness. You need a way to detect the shift while it's happening. Here's how you catch it early, in real time. First, the mismatch check. Pay attention to alignment. Do their words match their tone? Do their responses match their usual energy? Someone might say, "It's fine," but their tone feels tight, slightly forced. That gap between what's said and how it feels is your first signal that something underneath isn't matching the surface. Most people ignore this because technically nothing is wrong. But this is exactly where the pattern starts. Second, the energy recovery check. Every interaction has a natural rhythm. Sometimes there's a small, awkward moment. That's normal. But usually the energy recovers. It resets. When this pattern is forming, it doesn't. A comment lands slightly off, and the conversation never fully comes back to baseline. It stays just a little tense, a little disconnected. That lingering shift is not random. It's a sign something got stored instead of released. Third, the repetition check. One moment means nothing. 2 moments, maybe coincidence. But when you start seeing the same subtle signals repeat, delayed reactions, shorter replies, slight defensiveness, that's no longer a moment. That's a pattern forming in real time. And this is where you gain an advantage most people never use. Instead of reacting automatically, you pause and ask one question. What story might be forming on the other side right now? That question alone interrupts the loop, because now you're not just reacting to behavior, you're recognizing the pattern behind it. From here, you have options. You can clarify something before it gets misinterpreted. You can shift tone before it gets labeled the wrong way. Or you can simply stay grounded instead of over-adjusting and feeding the loop. This isn't about overthinking every interaction. It's about catching the right signals early enough to stay in control. Because once you can spot the pattern as it's forming, you're no longer inside it blindly. You're watching it, and that changes everything. Most people don't get confused because people change. They get confused because they notice the pattern too late. By the time something feels off, they're already inside a dynamic they don't fully understand. So they react, they guess, they try to fix things without seeing what's actually driving the behavior. But once you see how these shifts actually form, you stop reacting to behavior and start understanding it. You stop taking every response at face value. You stop assuming every reaction is about the moment in front of you. Instead, you start seeing the layers underneath. The patterns, the assumptions, the silent loops shaping how someone is responding to you, and that changes how you show up. You don't over-adjust every time something feels slightly off. You don't immediately blame yourself or them. You don't get pulled into confusion trying to decode every small reaction. You stay grounded. You observe first. You respond with intention instead of instinct. Because now, you understand something most people miss. Not every reaction is about what just happened. Sometimes it's about everything that's been building, silently, in the background. And when you recognize that in real time, you stop feeding patterns that don't serve you and start navigating interactions with clarity instead of guesswork. That's where the real shift happens. Because now, you're not just part of the interaction. You're aware of the system shaping it. And that awareness gives you something most people never develop: control without forcing, and clarity without overthinking. And that's the difference between feeling blindsided and staying in control.